Aloha Aquascaping World, this is Stephen Chong coming to you today with part 3 on my series talking about my IAPLC, that's the International Aquatic Plant Layout Contest 2020 work, Undying, World Rank 2 Gold Prize. So it was a major honor to receive this ranking in the 20th anniversary year of the contest. Today is part 3, parts 1 and 2, I'll include links in the description. I definitely recommend watching those as it'll give you better context into what we're going to talk about today. Part 1 was a video talking about the themes, the concepts, the different ideas and research I did in order to put this layout together. Part 2 talked about the construction of the hardscape, especially the main wood area around here that really gives the aquascape its structure and also builds these windows as I imagined them that frame these special mirror areas, which is the subject of today's video. So for people who are less familiar with competitive aquascaping and with aquariums in general, aquarium design in general, if you think about it, underwater, there's usually not a water surface because this is the water surface, right? If you're making a terrarium, vivarium, some type of scape or miniature design that is in the air, of course you can create the image of a water surface by using actual water. But inside of an aquarium, this illusion is, it has to be done with an artificial material. In this case, it's mirror. For aquascapers who are more familiar with the history of the contest, they'll know that a trick like this, using mirror to make a special effect or imitate the surface of the water, isn't exactly new, though it is extremely rare. My particular innovation was using it as a reflection area, putting in these background trees and combining that with the mirror in order to create the illusion of the surface of a pond or a swamp or a stream, the image of standing trees reflected on the surface of the mirror. I used the mirror as an extra canvas to show another aspect of nature. I talked a lot about that in part 1 and 2. Here we want to talk about the actual technique of putting this together. How exactly is it that I was able to pull this off? But before we get into that, what I want to do is talk about what this technique isn't. So in order to do that and to give you guys better context, we have to go back to Tanaka Katsuki's work. Tanaka Katsuki is a really innovative artist, designer. He's a famous illustrator and designer here in Japan. In the history of the IAPLC, he's a veteran of the contest and has ranked in the top places several times. This year he ranked 19. Oh, look. In fact, you can see he just put up new blogs talking about his layout this year. I'm going to have to go back and read those in detail. So Tanaka Katsuki maintains this blog, Kyoto Seiha Daigaku Suiso Gakubu no Mizukusa Blogu, and every year he puts up detailed information about how he made his aquascapes. In 2016, he took World Rank 4 and did it with this really cool technique. He was the first one to use a mirror inside an aquascape. You can see that there's a flat plane of mirror here, and he built up layers of stone and wood in order to create this structure that eventually became the final aquascape. Of course, this is a little bit more abstract than what I eventually did. Some judges just interpret this as a flash of light or like the whole aquascape was floating. When I personally saw it, I thought Tanaka Katsuki was trying to capture the energy of a fast-flowing river based on the structure of based on the line drawn by the mirror and how you see these white flowing energy. But I think because most of the competitive aquascapers who are familiar with the contest know of this work, that's kind of the starting point that people are looking at this. So in order to bring up new viewers, people who are less familiar with the contest and less familiar with Tanaka Katsuki-san's work, I wanted to introduce it and talk about how he did it in order to contrast. So you can see, here's his first blog talking about, well actually it's step 3. Never mind. For people who are really interested, you should probably go back and start with step 1. But it shows, this is the first entry talking about the construction of the base of the aquarium. You can see he's piecing together different acrylic pieces, carving them into shape. These holes, I'm sure, are made so that water can flow in between the different pieces. He's putting together the base so that he can place the mirror. The acrylic pieces are pinched in with rock, and then he's covered them with pumice, garden stone, as we call it in Japanese, garden karuishi. And then on top of that, he's placed a single plane of mirror um, upon which the entire aquascape is going to sit. And this is actually a very funny blog to read through because he's like, oh my god, my eyes, the brightness, it hurts so bad. And in his later recounting of the scape for the ADA video, as well as in this blog, he talks about how he really had to buy deep sunglass shades, which is something I did steal in order to put this together because, man, working with on top of mirror underneath the solar ones from ADA is very painful, as I actually got to experience myself this year. So I wanted to walk you guys through this process to show you this was the method that everyone had thought of, had seen before in terms of using mirror in an aquascape, because this is not how I did it. People who have watched part 1 and part 2 or seen my posts on Facebook know that this is the original base of the aquascape. You can see that there's sand underneath. What is similar to Tanaka Katsuki-san's work is that underneath the sand, there is a layer of karuishi, the same layer of pumice, just like in his blog. Not so much that I was taking from him, so much as this is the standard technique in TAU, and for many Japanese diorama-style aquascapers, it's a philosophy that we share with Tanaka-san because it works. The reason why you want to use garden stone pumice is because what you really want to avoid are areas of compaction. Like if you made this base purely out of sand, then there would be no room for air in between the sand, and you'd have anaerobic environments and pockets where things would be going very bad inside the aquarium, and like harmful bacteria could propagate. So what you do is you have these pumice stones so that there's just a little bit of air in between, a little bit of room for oxygen, so that beneficial bacteria can get what they need and find homes. It's just like having actually extra filter media inside of the aquarium itself. If I was super rich, maybe I'd make the whole thing out of instead of pumice, use C-Chem matrix or something like that. But the idea is just that you want an environment where beneficial bacteria will be able to live instead of harmful bacteria. So the entire base is made out of pumice, and on top of that sand. And unlike Tanaka Katsuki-san, before putting the mirror in, I actually did the main hardscape. So you'll see in part 2 that I actually built up the entire wood frame before starting work on the mirrors. And the reason why I did that, well, there's two reasons really. One, looking at Tanaka-san's technique of putting in this one frame before putting in the stones, I felt like, well, first of all, I'd have to be working on top of and around this mirror surface the entire time, stones slipping around and moving out of place. So there'd be that constant struggle, and I didn't want, the restriction of the flat plane of mirror to be getting in the way of my creative process. The other reason why I didn't want to do this is because it completely, you forfeit the ability to control the angle and positioning of the mirror. You forfeit the ability to control the reflections with the positioning of the mirror itself. Everything is flat from the get-go. And the other reason is because there's a final third reason, and that's because if you look into the actual details of how this is put together, one thing that I got a lot of comments on is that the fact that you can see plants like cobra grass, liliopsis or hair grass, and hydrocotyles growing in between the pieces of mirror, and people were freaking out because they were imagining that I used the same technique as Tanaka-san, right? which is impossible if you have one flat plane of glass. But if you have cut up pieces of mirror that are installed after the fact, then it's hard, but you can calculate where you want plants from the beginning, and cut pieces such that you'll make pockets, planters, if you will, for for grassy plants to be put into place. And I was really set on doing this. And the reason why is, well, you can see it best in this window here. You can actually see the reflection of Liliopsis on the surface of this mirror down here. In a marsh setting, or you can see it here as well. In a marsh setting, one of the really memorable views is seeing the reflection of the plants themselves on the surface of the water. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to play with that element by having pockets where not just moss, because if it was a flat plane, I would be limited to epiphytes. But if I was able to cut myself holes like this, then I would be able to have standing plants that could show their image inside of the reflection as well. So those are the reasons why I avoided Tanaka-san's technique. As mentioned, I created a base of karuishi and put the hardscape together to have my windows in place. And then afterwards, I installed separate pieces of mirror into the base of the aquarium, sitting on top of that sand layer, in order to put the mirrors where I wanted. Now, how did we do it? This is the really tricky part. Fortunately, I have a bit of experience working with glass. When I was an elementary school kid, I actually did stained glass windows. That was another art form that interested me back in the past. So I had experience cutting glass. You can use a scorer or one of those tools with an oiled wheel to cut lines in glass and then cut them into place with clamps. You can basically break it into the shape that you want. So I did a lot of calculation work, starting at this point with the frame of the wood in place, and having the vision in my mind of what I wanted the aquascape to look like. I just tried to imagine where I would need pockets of plants, where I would need mirror reflection areas, and then think about how to put them in place and imagine the shapes that I needed. So there's several mirrors. There's a single mirror here in the middle. There's another mirror in the back. This entire front area is one mirror with a pocket cut in the front for that piece of wood, and then there's more mirrors in back of the piece of wood, which is how you're getting that that space, that glow back there. To me, guys, like the negative space in the midground is super important, and I wanted to make sure that I would be able to customize it, tweak it to my liking, and really use the mirrors to bring out that to its best effect. You'll see that there's white lines, but these paths of sand are not simply there to imitate Fukada-san's technique of making trails that lead to the viewpoint. Of course, that's what I was aiming for from an artistic standpoint, but besides just making paths to strengthen the viewpoint, the lines serve a practical function. Well, actually, two practical functions. The first of which is hiding the edges of the mirrors themselves. Because there are several pieces, if you have bare, raw edges of glass clearly viewable to the audience, it's going to break the illusion. It's going to take them out of the space and out of enjoying the artistry. In order to avoid that, I had to cover the edges with sand or hide them in other ways. Maybe even use lighting in some places to you can see that this is actually white sand up against the mirror, but because there's fine white sand covering the edge, and also there's the flash of light in the photography, you really can't see it. But beyond that, the second reason is that it's just very impractical to be working around mirrors that are constantly shifting around and moving. For instance, these embankments and these different areas covering the edges of the mirror, it's actually made out of tissue, super glue, and then sand poured on top of that. So the mirrors are being held in place by these different white edges. Of course, I mixed in pebbles to make it seem even more natural. I'm really proud of the work in and around the edge of the pond. Um, the idea of placing pebbles in some places where I had plants. All of this had to be calculated at the stage of cutting the mirrors because there's no fixing it after the fact. That's part of what makes it really hard to put this design together. The fact that you need to be on top of your game in terms of foresight, um, how you want to show different details of the aquascape, how you want to figure out the practical issues, what it is that you want to show on the reflection of the mirrors itself. Just imagine, guys, that as I was cutting the pieces of glass together, I was doing that in such a way that I knew how they would be attached together with the super glue bits, and I knew where there were going to be pockets for plants to be placed in, um, and I knew where I was going to have pebbles and sand and so forth in order to bring all of this together as a single illusion. And there's an added layer of difficulty to this because one thing that I didn't account for until I was actually messing around with it was the fact that, in nature, when you have a natural flat surface of water, of course, every surface of water is perfectly flat. It's perfectly straight. And therefore, a perfectly straight tree will naturally have a perfectly straight reflection. But when you're placing pieces of mirror on top of a surface, an artificially made surface of sand, and it isn't water being affected by gravity, if the mirror's angle is off, then even if it's a perfectly straight piece of wood, its reflection will go off in weird angles um, that you weren't accounting for. So this was a major pain of putting this together, and it's just something that had to be done with trial and error. It's it's not impossible for an experienced aquascaper though, because just like in aquascaping, we do photography and we do aquascaping, and um, they're kind of reversed art forms from each other. In photography, you're looking for the media and then you move the frame around to find the exact right spot. In the aquarium, you have the frame decided upon already, and then you're moving the material around inside of it in order to get to look how you want within the frame. Um, this is kind of a reverse art form. It's a reverse discipline from working with the mirrors. Working with the reflections on the top of the water and on the sides of the aquarium. For an aquascaper who's used to it, you have a sense of how things reflect, and you are used to using material in order to get the reflections that you want. Like, I know that if I put a piece of wood here, its reflection will go like this, for instance. Or if I put this giant piece of wood here at this angle, you're not going to see any reflection of it at all here in the mirror. Like, those are things that I understand from experience. This is kind of like the reverse of that exercise because you're trying to figure out, because the hardscape stays in place, you need to have these straight angles for the wood in order to present the image of straight trees. And then you're adjusting the mirror in order to make the reflection that you want. So just the surface of the water is always going to have the exact right reflection with the wood. But then you have to adjust the angle that the mirror is sitting on in order to get that consistency of reflection with the surface of the water. Now, this is a place that I actually was jealous of Tanaka Katsuki-san's technique because, if you have a flat single surface of mirror from the very get-go, then, this would be consistent with the surface of the water. No problem there. You just have to make sure that, the height is the same on both sides and that all your cutting is straight. But in my method, which has lots of convenience in the form of, prioritizing how great the wood is going to look by prioritizing how the hardscape is put together, and also giving you freedom in terms of planting and whatnot, the reasons I explained before. The reverse side of that is that you're going to have to deal with this issue of how to get the mirrors straight, and that's just trial and error and lots of hard work to get them fit into place. Yeah, so anyway, it's not a technique meant for the faint of heart. I will say though that after I started doing it, it wasn't that it wasn't too much out of the scope of, you know, our typical range of techniques. Because after a while, I started, just getting the sense that this was like an extra rock, an extra big piece of hardscape, and the way to manipulate it into the right angle was just like working with any other big piece of hardscape, which is to, have a sense of where you want to place it, and then use small rocks and small pieces of other supporting materials to get it into the position that you want. After a while, having it in the general area that I wanted, and being able to compare to the reflections of these reference sticks, I just used small pebbles in different places to adjust the angle of the mirror until it felt more or less correct. And then at that point, put in the tissue, put in the super glue, lock everything in place, make sure it doesn't move, and just work very carefully around it in the final design. Um, Once everything was in, then it actually became really fun. Figure out, putting in the details like these little pebbles around here, seeing the plants grow in, figure out where to lay like more little pebbles on top, and also I will say that doing maintenance was a kind of a pain in the butt because instead of having just the four walls to algae scrape, it was like having an extra fourth wall, or fifth, sixth, seventh. Yes, if you just bring an algae scraper, like the kind we use to always clean the glass, and apply it to the mirror on the bottom, you can keep these clean in the same way as your typical walls of glass. It's just that means that you have that extra bit of work. Also, the hilarious thing was working on this during the algae phase. After 2 weeks, the entire scape gets covered with algae. That's part of the maturation process of a typical aquarium. And then you put in like 30 amanos and 10, 15, 20 black mollies in order to get rid of it all. And they do, go to town, but they make a lot of poop, and it's hilarious because there's no carpet, right? So it was just all on top of the mirror, and super visible. I swear it was like having a poop bottom aquarium instead of a soil bottom aquarium or sand. But yeah, in that sense, because it's just an extra pane of glass on the bottom, doing vacuuming work around it wasn't that difficult, and there were ways to clean it like an algae scraper. So, in many ways, it was completely brand new and completely out there in terms of technique. But the methods to solve this issue, most of them were versed in typical aquascaping technique. These weren't things that would be impossible for an aquascaper of significant experience to figure out, using the range of techniques and knowledge that we have available to us. So anyway, there's my explanation of how I put the mirrors together in order to create this illusion of a pond. I hope that this was good reference material for many of you, though I don't personally recommend you go after this technique unless you really want it. Unless you really want it. But hey, it's an evolving art form, and just like I took Tanaka Katsuki-san's original idea and decided to do something totally different in order to get a different type of result, I'm sure that someday someone, maybe even next year, will be trying to imitate this technique and come up with ways that are even easier to deal with it than what I went through. Because man, guys, it was hell. It was hell, but it was so worth it. Gold prize, rank 2. Um, couldn't be more grateful. Couldn't be more grateful to my wife and kids for putting up with me while I was doing all of this. And couldn't be more grateful to all of you for joining my YouTube channel and tuning in to listen here. Um, because of all of you, we've reached 8,000 subscribers. One goal that I had setting up Stevescapes last year before Nature Aquarium Party 2019 would be, it was to reach the YouTube partnership program by the end of the year. I needed over 1,000 subscribers and over 4,000 hours of views. and I had no idea if I would be able to achieve either. Thanks to you guys, just 2 weeks ago, I was able to join the YouTube Partner Program, and I really appreciate all the support and the subscriptions. And if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, and I hope to be doing more work for you guys later in this type of explanation video format. Take care. Take it easy.